Welcome everyone. I'm Colin Simpson and this is the July webinar for the TELEdvisors Network. Today we are going to be having a look at HyFlex Teaching, what happens behind the scenes, and our presenters are a range of learning designers, academic developers, education technologists from around Australia. Just as a quick introduction, if you're not familiar with the group, TELEdvisors Network is a community of practitioners made up of people working as education technologists, learning designers, academic developers, and in a host of similar roles. We might move on to our next presenters, who are Courtney, Shalavin and Sandris Zeviots from the University of Sydney Business Co-design team.
So my name is Courtney Shalavin. I'm a learning designer at the University of Sydney Business School, and with me today is Sandris Zeviots, who's one of my colleagues and a close collaborator of mine who's an educational developer. Unfortunately, Elaine Huber was unable to join us today. She's our academic director of our team, so she's our fearless leader. And we're just going to talk a little bit about how the business school has approached supporting hybrid teaching. There's a few different facets that we'll go through. We'll start off by just sort of giving some context about our team and who we are and the context around why we do what we do. And then we'll go into our pilot learning spaces and talk a little bit about those before getting into some workshops that we ran and the outcomes of those and some recommendations for all of you. So I'll start off. I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodianship and law of the country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand. I pay my respects, we pay our respects to those who have cared and continue to care for country. I'm presenting to you from Darawal land today on the south coast. Moving into our team, so we're called the Business Co-design team, and we're an interdisciplinary team that came together under a strategic project called CLASS, which is Connected Learning at Scale. There are many people who work on our team, and these are just four of the key areas four of the key roles that we have. We have our educational developers, which is Sandris. So they advise our educators on strategies, teaching strategies, activities, how to engage students, how to build community. We have our media producers who do probably what you'd expect. They do podcasting, they do video, and they do a lot of DIY, do-it-yourself sort of studio and at-home production with our academics. There's learning designers, which is me. So I look after our learning management system Canvas and advise academics on how to really leverage that to get what they want if they're teaching. We do a lot of design solutions and are across sort of interactive technologies. And then finally, and most importantly, we have our evaluators and research associates. So they do all of our data collection, analysis and reporting, and just create feedback loops for us to really check in and see how we're doing and how our student experience is going. I'm going to hand off to Sandris to talk about the project as a whole, just to provide a little bit more context there. Sandris, are you ready to go?
Yep, thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks, Courtney. So as Courtney mentioned, so Business Co-design team has come alive as part of a 5-year strategic project, which we call Connected Learning at Scale, and we use just an acronym CLASS for it. And the main idea is to focus on business school and the units in it, and that's the largest faculty at Sydney. And what CLASS stands for, it may sound like a very sophisticated framework, but it really has 3 very clear principles. And the first principle, as you can see, is information engagement. And what it actually means is everything. Think of Canvas, anything that's happening on Canvas, making sure that students have opportunities to engage with the information. Also, a part of the first principle is how academics communicate with their students. Then principle 2 is everything that is happening in a classroom context. So connected participation and active learning. And I think previous speaker as well covered the active learning aspect. So anything that academics are doing with students, making sure that the learning is not passive, there are activities, and there is some kind of authentic and genuine participation, and students have opportunities to connect with each other and also with their tutors and teaching team. And finally, the last principle is everything to do with assessments and making sure that we're not just building assessments that are sitting in silos and students can't use after they finish university, but making sure that they're relevant, authentic, they can apply to their own context, and also using feed-forward mechanism, which means that in whatever I receive, whatever feedback I receive in, let's say, assessment 1, I can use for improving my assessment 2, and so on. And originally, Connected Learning at Scale project was built for 8 selected units, and there was this plan that we'll be working with these units for a couple of years, and really they will be fully transformed. However, COVID came and it fully changed these plans. So we've worked with these 8 units. So now we have 20 of these deep touch units, and we're working with way more something that we call light touch units, where we have opportunities to really redesign and co-design these units at a smaller scale. But the whole idea is that COVID definitely transformed the way we approach this project. Having said that, we still use Connected Learning at Scale 3 principles, and they still really guide our work. And as you can see at the bottom, so the plan is that we start the co-design process with planning and designing the unit with the unit coordinators. Then we build, we test, we see what works, what doesn't work, and then we implement. We get some feedback from students, we get some feedback from other partners, stakeholders, and then we basically go through the same process. So it's a bit of circular, and every round we hopefully improve something. And today we're going to focus on hybrid teaching workshops, which Courtney and I run for our academic partners in the business school, and that sits under Principle 2. And I'm going to take you through our hybrid teaching spaces, because that's where these workshops primarily took place. And we have 2 pilot spaces in the business school, which I call them as hybrid teaching friendly, which means they are set up as new spaces that offer these hybrid elements, and they're nicely integrated. So I'm not sure how well you can see but the upper picture, it's a larger classroom. We call it a red classroom, and it's split into 3 areas. So the first part, which is the closest to you, it's where students gather. It's almost like a mini lecture space where students come together and kind of find out some or explore some new content. Then the second space, which is further, which is I think probably 10 centimeters higher, it's more designed for group work. It has interactive screens where students can, for both online and in-person students can meet and interact and collaborate. And the last space, which is at the very end, it's more for reflection and really building what's coming next. And then the bottom picture is the smaller hybrid room, and it's more activity-based learning space. It's more flexible. All furniture can be changed depending on the needs. And what's important is that both rooms use MS Hubs, and you can see the picture on the right. And I think the previous speaker as well talked about it's a massive tablet on wheels. And we didn't expect that academics will really like this tool as much as they are. There are a lot of bookings for MS Hubs. So they're used mostly as cameras, so making sure that online students can see what's happening in the classroom with a wider angle lens, and also used for interactive tools. And Courtney is going to talk about these interactive tools in a second. But having this kind of screen that allows in-person students to interact with online students, and MS Hubs are used for this purpose. And just to note that the business co-design team is taking care of booking these both rooms, and we also evaluate these spaces to making sure that whatever our interventions are, they're working, or if they're not working, then how can we improve them? So it's evidence-based kind of mechanism that we use here. Courtney?
Okay, so hopefully you can still hear me. let's move on to the kind of meat and potatoes of this, which is talking about what we did to upskill our educators in hybrid teaching. So the main takeaway is that we ran workshops, and something we really wanted to clarify here is kind of the challenge and what we were trying to achieve through these workshops. And the main thing was building educators' capacity in facilitating synchronous classes with on-campus and remote students. So what we were really dealing with was a cohort that was not only online and remote, but also remote in an international setting. So a lot of our students actually come from China, and dealing with classes where it just didn't make sense. The class size was small enough that it didn't make sense to have an online strand of students and an offline strand of students. So we really needed to put those together. I mean, more widely at the University of Sydney, I've seen other instances where people have chosen to do hybrid teaching just because they had a lab, it's a lab class, and they really felt like the face-to-face students needed that, and the online students would benefit from being there in the room as well. So that was a challenge that we were trying to get at. So our workshop aims were kind of fourfold, and you can see them on the screen there. A lot of it was about just informing them of good practice and supporting them with their planning and delivery, introducing them to the hybrid teaching spaces, but then also how we can mobilize other teaching spaces within the business school that aren't, equipped with those Microsoft hubs, and then also just a way to provide at-elbow advice, which is a very tall order to do in one workshop, which we did in about 60 minutes. So just going into a little bit more detail around the design decisions that we made when we were doing it. So we really wanted them to be experiential. So we wanted our participants to have hands-on experience, and we also wanted them to be realistic, like a simulation. So we did them in hybrid mode, and we used Zoom and then the available AV technologies available in these spaces. One of the key things that we set out to achieve was to model best practice. So, that was kind of why we did it in hybrid. It just doesn't make sense to model best practice when you're doing them wholly online or wholly face-to-face, because you're not really showing and modeling best practice around how to handle these sort of situations and these cohorts. So one of the things we did as well was to experiment with different combinations of video and audio outputs. So that was kind of grounded in that simulation, I guess, around, look, not everyone's going to be in these spaces. We want as many people as possible to be in our hybrid spaces, but the reality is that you might be in a room that just has technologies that are available as standard. So we tried a couple of different mixes. We used a laptop as audio and video output only. We used lapel and handheld mics as the audio output, and then maybe use the laptop as a video output. So we really tried to combine and play with these outputs with the educators so that they could get an understanding of what a lo-fi option is, which might be just use your laptop, and maybe what a hi-fi option is, which is if you're in these rooms, you could use the Microsoft Hub to show the webcam view of the room as one sort of video input, and then you could have your face on a different screen. And I guess the final point that I wanted to cover here is that the whole point of it was to simulate what learning might be like for students in hybrid classes. So really trying to take our educators, put them in the shoes of students, put them in the shoes of online students, and see what some of the challenges could be. I'm sure more than once I probably focused far too much on the face-to-face students, and the online participants would have felt that and would have felt, how difficult it is to speak up and say, hey, can you repeat that question? They're kind of the three of the main design elements. Just getting into the guts of the structure. So it was basically, we had three different parts to the workshop. The first part was overviewing strategies and available support. So you can see in those two slides to the right there that we kind of covered. The top one there is sort of talking about, look, this is a strategy around facilitating the room and setting up clear expectations and culture. And then the bottom slide is some of the strategies that Sandris collected for us based on research that we used, that were just kind of meant to be sort of simple tips and tricks that they could use, So, talking about whether we should keep students in Zoom to face-to-face groups, or should we mix them? What's going to be the easiest option? What's going to be the best option? And tips around, having a backup communication channel for everyone. If Zoom goes down, what are you going to do? Are you going to email them? Are you going to use Canvas announcements? In the next section, we kind of looked at two technologies and provided sort of a hands-on experience with both of them. So we used Padlet and Jamboard. And the main draw card of these two technologies was that they're simple, they're easy to use, they're free, Padlet in particular is supported by our central teaching team, so it's really well supported around the university. And I guess in the context of hybrid, it was really important for us to pick tools that blended those two cohorts together. And we felt that Padlet and Jamboard did a really good job at that. So you could have people in small groups, your students in small groups, all working on the same thing, whether they're face-to-face or online, and you could come together and have that sort of whole group discussion using what had been generated in the rooms. And what we did with the educators was basically we gave them a scenario, which you can kind of maybe see the what is one positive experience sentence at the top of the Padlet there, which was kind of just more of a trigger to get them to play with the tool. So you can see in that Jamboard at the bottom, you know, people just went wild trying out post-it notes and circles and drawing on things just to see what they could do with it. So there was kind of that playful aspect to it too. And then lastly, just briefly, we had a Q&A session at the end, which is really where we did that at elbow support. So anecdotally, a lot of those questions were around kind of policy, what can I do, what can't I do, you know, what's the nitty gritty of Padlet, how do I get my account? So it just gave that little, it's just that what everyone does, I guess, that Q&A section at the end. Just quickly at the end, we did do a post-workshop evaluation survey. And we found some interesting stuff. So one thing that I didn't include on this slide was around motivation, so why the educators to attend. And it was interesting to see that a lot of them were interested just out of curiosity in their own professional development, which you'd kind of expect they're interested to attend because, you know, they've got to teach it, but they were just curious about this new mode of teaching. Some key takeaways were tips and tricks for teaching hybrid classes and the interactive tools and strategies. The most valuable was an open-ended question where our participants indicated that they, you know, really enjoyed the hints and tips again and thought that the helpful and well-explained recommendations were really good. And really what's probably most useful to you is what they wanted more of. So they wanted more of setting up a room for hybrid teaching, and they had some concerns around, look, you know, we're introducing all these technologies. How do we make sure we don't overwhelm students? And how do we retain the focus on learning as opposed to trying to teach them all these technologies? So we really used this evaluation survey to kind of scope the recommendations that Sandris is about to go through with you. So I'll move over and hand over to him now.
Thanks. So we've run 9 workshops so far. So these are the 4 main takeaways from our end, and something that we would definitely recommend to others and also ourselves if we would do them again. So the first thing is experiment with workshop delivery. So every single workshop, we've done it in slightly different way. We use different rooms, we use different audio and visual input and output options, and we discuss these options with people who attended the workshop. And I think they really appreciate it because they knew that for the next workshop we may be doing something slightly different, and just talk about different options. And sometimes it worked well, sometimes it worked less well, and kind of seeing the experience from the user experience, which is the students, was probably quite helpful to several academics. Then in some instances we invited participants to experience poor audio quality as well, just to highlight the importance of clear sound. Second point is, and this is interesting, it may sound really harsh in the current environment, but for most of the time, New South Wales was, for most workshops, there were no COVID cases. So we run the workshop in a hybrid mode, but still majority joined the workshop online. In RSVPs, we noticed that many people intended to attend the workshop in person. However, on the day of the workshop, they joined via Zoom. And the reason why we are encouraging in-person attendance is that we've really noticed that people who are in class, they benefited at a very different level. They stayed longer, they asked more specific questions. Actually, most of the questions came from people on campus. And I think the rationale is that most hybrid classes are run from campus. And there are quite several hands-on details that we allow academics to experiment with, play with, like MS Hubs, because it's quite a different experience when you use MS Hub from your computer, and quite a different experience that you will actually be doing from your classroom when you, how do students interact with these hubs. So we really we don't have a perfect solution here, but that's something just to be aware of. The next point is just to keep the workshop simple and tailored. And we had a wide spectrum of staff attending, from some with no expectations or no experience with the hybrid classes, and others really had very specific things that they really wanted to talk through. And in one instance, one discipline booked us for a workshop that is tailored directly to them, and they invited academics internally who have interest in hybrid teaching or have questions around it, and it worked really, really well because there was a lot of motivation and a lot of questions that guided the whole workshop. And the last point is about definitions. So we use the word hybrid because most of our students are based in China. They don't have that HyFlex option, and we also noticed that there is another unit at the University of Sydney, and they use the HyFlex term, and it really affected, I think, some academics, probably confused they saw both terms as very, very different. So that's why we spent some time also on addressing these things. But having a term that is used across the institution is really, really helpful. That's it from us. Thank you very much. Feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. Over to you.
Thank you
Colin.
so much, Courtney. Thank you, Sandris.